Shalom and Rastafari. This is your Wyndham Ras Baruchu Teferi. And right now we in the Feast of Tabernacles, and we're into I believe we are in the fifth day of the Feast of Tabernacles. And one thing that I did want to mention about the Feast of Tabernacles was that we were noticing in the pure language of the King of Kings, using the IOTA software, we were noticing that there are seven. It's like a code. There's a seven code with the Feast of Tabernacles, and I also give thanks to the brothers and sisters of the Rastafari Foundation, of the Lion of Judah Society, and the Rastafari South Committee, and many of the other brothers and sisters on the WhatsApp, on the Rastafari WhatsApp. Let the I give a shout out, and to the Discipleship Radio, which has really been holding the fort for bringing forth the testimonies of QEDAMAWI, HAILE SELASSIE, Christ in his kingly character, and the name of his son, the Bein Ha-Elohim, Jesus Christus, Jesus Christ. Now, what we were studying here, actually, we're studying it actually for a few days, because I was really trying to figure out a way to bring it forth and articulate it, that there were 7 verses associated with the Feast of Tabernacles. And right here in the pure language of the King of Kings, the Yadaseh Baal, right here, the Yadaseh Baal, and these 7 verses, they basically give us a basically what Yahweh lets us know is that the people, the Hebrews, the black people, the black and brown people, the Jews, the real Jews, black people, the real Hebrews, that by not keeping code with the Torah, we would actually miss all the feast days, these 7 feast days. Now, in the first verse that mentions the Feast of Tabernacles is in EVERY-THANG, or the book of Leviticus, which is Leviticus 23 and 34. Now, when we go into that verse for Leviticus 23 and 34, it basically it gives us a breakdown of why Ha-Elohim wants us to keep each of the feast days throughout the entire year of the Torah cycle. So we begin to have this understanding. Then the next verses, basically, they give like an informative and a definition of the areas in which that the Feast of Tabernacles is mentioned within the Torah. And one of the places that we do notice, which is really important, is 10-bit Zacharias. So, it's like when the people have come around to getting things together, because everything is in its season. So if we look at the seasons, even the people growing in the seasons when they're being grafted back in, as those wild olive branches being grafted back into their own tree. As they begin to notice and they get on code, these are the things that we start to notice, that there's a set order that we must follow in a pattern, with the Almighty. And I give thanks to the Rebbe and all of the other brothers and sisters out there who have been supporting Rastafari, the true Rastafari, all over the world, the black Jews and the Hebrews, the true people of Christ, and all of the seed of Abraham, those who are of Israel, those who have that spirit to worship the Almighty in spirit and in truth. Now, what we notice in Zacharias basically gives us a testimony to what happens to the nations, actually, who don't come forth to offer for the Feast of Tabernacles in that time. That's when the people have gathered together, and they have come back into their true order, and they are serving Ha-Elohim, and this is the testimony of what will happen to them. Now, in EVERY-THANG chapter 23, and we go to EVERY-THANG chapter 23, so we go to the book of Leviticus in chapter 23, and if you read it, it gives a breakdown of each feast. So it would be good, let us read that right now. Let us read that out. and then we can get to the next verses that speak of the Feast of Tabernacles, concerning Israel and why Yahweh wants this order done this way, or to be on time, you know what I mean, to be on point with the season and the time and the real Hebrew calendar. Because there's brothers out there who some of the Israelites, we notice that they don't necessarily want to use the Hebrew calendar. And another one of the things that we notice is that with Hebrew, this Hebrew and the differentiations between Hebrew and then the Paleo Hebrew and then what they call like the Masoretic Hebrew. And from the studying of the Masoretic Hebrew, or the modern day Hebrew, what we notice is that we're able to trace words back into the pure language of the King of Kings. We're able to actually trace the words back into the Amharic. You know, the true meaning of the word, when we're actually tracing the word, and then we can go and see that it has a relationship with the pure language of the King of Kings. And that's why we give thanks for the pure language for the Royal Amharic, because the Royal Amharic will let us know if we're on point with what type of lettering or what type of words that we're using in the Hebrew. You know, so, and this would be my suggestion if ones are studying like Paleo Hebrew or they're studying the regular Hebrew, by tracing these words back in the pure language of the King of Kings and the Royal Amharic, we're able to get a grasp on what the word is and what meaning it is. Not necessarily, well, it brings us to an overall overall perspective of what the word, what is the one word meaning. You know, what is the root word meaning for all the words that are used in the Hebrew in the different places that you might find them in the Bible. You know, so, and that may not be easily understood, so let us kind of give a, you know, a reference to what we're speaking about. Now, over here, when we go to, let me see, Leviticus 23, right? Because Leviticus 23, we're speaking about the Feast of Tabernacles, and being that I believe we're in the 5th day of the Feast of Tabernacles, and we got 3 more to go. The first day, you know, that one should do no servile work, and then the 8th day, the convocation day. And then we get basically the overall, the definitive perspective of what it means to keep the feast days in Leviticus chapter 23. So let us go to Leviticus 23 one moment so that we can, you know, as a matter of fact, we were trying to figure out a better way to kind of articulate this meaning of what we seen here, you know, but sometimes it's just best to just read it out, what it is. So now right here we're going to read Leviticus all the way up to verse 34, you know, so we can get an understanding of what exactly is I speaking about keeping the 7 feasts, and that there's a code, you know, it's like the 7 code, and of course, if you heard of the clashing of like the 2 7s, you know what I mean, and Yahweh basically, he starts this out in this chapter in Leviticus. He starts it out with the Shabbat, keeping the Shabbat day holy. You know, and there is a relationship with the 7 days that we see, and then also with the 7 feasts, and also with the time cycle of the Torah portions, concerning the 7 regalim, the 7 whole, you know, the 7 holy feast days, or the seven festivals that we are supposed to keep to HaElohim. You know, as we see here, the Yadaseh Baal, and this is mentioned in the Feast of Tabernacles right here, and it goes all the way to Yohannes Wengel 7 and 2, which is also part of the portion readings in the Feast of Tabernacle reading. So now when we go over here to Leviticus, let's read this out. So, and the Yahweh spake to Moses, saying, speak to the children of Israel, and say to them concerning the feast, the moed, the appointed time, as was spoke about on the discipleship radio on for day 4 of the Feast of Tabernacles. And we give thanks to the Rebbe Wyndham Yadon, Raza Adinos Teferi, the host, and bringing forth much information that we needed, you know, and to begin to study Torah, because we begin to understand keeping the time and keeping the Torah and keeping the order. As you remember, like the Torah says, only a remnant, though Abraham's children be as the sand of the sea, only a remnant shall come out. And as the remnant, we're assuming, you know, not just assuming, but from the word of HaILE of those who follow the true order of the Bible, of the Torah, you know. And so we are seeing why, and this is explaining to us why. And then as we see what's going on with all the things that are happening out there in the news, the police brutality, and you know, just many different ways that the people are perishing, you know, many different ways that the people are perishing. So it says, and the Yahweh spake to Moses, saying, speak to the children of Israel and say to them concerning the feast of the Yahweh, which you shall proclaim. Okay, so it's a proclamation, a kara, it's a calling out, you know, we are calling this out. A holy, holy, Kodesh, Kodesh, Kodesh Mikra convocation. Even these are my feasts, or even these are Yahweh's moed, his time, his appointments, his fixed times or season, his festivals, and his assembly. These are part of his congregation. That's why when we pay attention to the black church congregation, if it's not in order with the Torah, this is how we know, because even Yahweh has told us that these are my feasts. He says that they are personally, they are my, that, you know, Yahweh is saying that these are his feasts. So this is what we need to understand. So 6 days shall work be done, but the 7th day is the Shabbat of rest. And I remember we were speaking about that the Shabbat was the rest day, and that it was like it was like the it's kind of like the precursor to the reason and the reason why we're supposed to keep the 7 feasts throughout the year, that we're supposed to keep these appointed assemblies, these times, these seasons, as a congregation of people, as a united people in the Almighty, that we're supposed to keep these feasts. So this is the reason why the Hebrew calendar and keeping the time with the Torah and the New Jerusalem, Lalabella, you know, Ethiopia, the New Jerusalem, you know, and that understanding. This is the reason why it's very important. Or the last king to sit on the throne of David, QEDAMAWI, HAILE SELASSIE. So when we understand that he is Father Christ, the Father of our black Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ, you know. So it says, and holy convocation, you shall do no work. It is the Shabbat, the Yahweh, is the Shabbat of the Yahweh in all your dwellings. And that's interesting concerning this feast. These feasts are all in their holy seasons. You know, they're considered Shabbat days. They are considered double Shabbat. So if it is on the Shabbat day, it's a double Sabbath. So these are the feasts of the Yahweh, even holy convocations, which you shall proclaim in their seasons, in the 14th day of the first month at even, the Yahweh's Passover. So now we have Yahweh saying that this is his Passover. You know, this is his Fasika, Pesach, Fasika, the Passover, right? You know, you see it says used only technically of the Hebraic Passover. There's a reason we say Hebraic, you know, not to disconclude all the Hebrew peoples or the Hebraic people. So not just Judah in that sense, and then not just the Jewish people, which are the people who you know, were grafted into the tree, the people who became those branches that were grafted in when the wild olive branches went astray. You know, so when all the other people were scattered out, or Jah had sent his people into captivity, there was another people who he said that I will bring you to jealousy with the people who are not a people. So that means that, you know, the light had come to the Gentiles, and they kept these feasts, they keep these orders. So in that sense, they also become more, they do become righteous over Israel, you know. And also in the New Testament, how it speaks about how if Israel is fallen, then the Gentiles have, you know, they'll come up when Israel has fallen. Though when Israel returns back to the Lord in fullness, then how much more rich they are, how much more the fullness for them when we come back. That's why we trying to come back. You know, we trying to overcome all the perils of Babylon, but the only way that is to follow the Almighty, follow the code of the Torah, and come back, you know, and not just have a congregation of church and out of self-righteousness or the way that we want to see it, but to see it the way the Almighty sees it. So, and on the 15th day of the month, of the same month, which would some brothers think that this is the reason why we keep up with the lunar calendar, and we also keep up with the Ethiopian calendar, because it puts us right on time and on point. And I want to give a shout out to Sister Mary Rose, because I see that she consistently posts a new post every day going over the Psalms, and she also puts the time on the Hebrew calendar and also the time from the Ethiopian calendar. And I give thanks to that. It even reminds us of the Rastafari Renaissance, from the brother Ligifdea, Walde Emmanuel. You know, we give thanks for that one too, because that brother, he also will post the times and the dates from the Hebrew calendar, and then also the dates from the Ethiopian calendar. And as well as, you should already, you know, if you're over in Babylon, you should already know the Gregorian calendar. I'm sure you already know what date that is. And on the 15th day of the same month is the feast of unleavened bread to the Yahweh. 7 days you must eat unleavened bread. So we got to the 6th verse, where it speaks about the Fasika. The Passover is the first of these feasts. So next, in the first day, you shall have a holy convocation, and tells you how to keep it. A holy convocation, a holy mikra, a kodesh mikra, and you shall do no servile work therein, but you shall offer an offering made by fire to the Yahweh. 7 days. In the 7th day is a holy convocation. So in the 7th day here, there's a holy convocation. The Mikra, so the first day and the 7th day. You shall do no servile work. And now verse 9. And Yahweh spake to Moses, saying, speak to the children of Israel and say to them, when you become to the land now. So now we already know that our goal, and following the order, following the Torah, following the code of His Imperial Majesty, following the unity, unifying, because Ha Elohim, the Almighty, says that He was going to repair the breaches. So we must unify in righteousness with Ha Elohim, in the order, in the pattern of the Torah, like we're supposed to. Then we can go over there to the land together, you know, and we'll have a set unit and a force, you know, of course, the things that come with a nation, truly, an ordered, a military force, and of course a police unit, you know, for that security. So, which I give you. So when you become to the land. So now when we get to the land, which I give to you, and shall reap. And before we can go to the land, we must keep this here. So this is good for us to go over this order, you know, these Torah orders and the Torah portion, and keeping up with the 7 feasts, keeping up with the time of the Almighty, the Ha Elohim, because this prepares us to then go over into the land, you know. But if we don't follow the order here, you know, then we'll fail. We're definitely going to fail on the land. So which I give to you, and you shall reap the harvest thereof. Then you shall bring a sheaf of the first fruit. So here is the first fruits, the Breshit, You know, katzir, reshi katzir, to the priest. So you shall bring a sheaf of the first fruits of your harvest to the priest. And verse 11, and he shall wave the sheaf before the Yahweh to be accepted for you on the morrow. And after the Shabbat, the priest shall wave it. And you shall offer that day when you wave the sheaf and he lamb without blemish of the first year for a burnt offering to the Yahweh. So we see the burnt offering, and that Jesus Christus came to fulfill the law, not do away with the law. So we know that the law of ordinances of sacrificing animals, that is the law that was really, that is done away with, because Jesus Christus came in the flesh. Christ himself came and gave himself as that sacrifice, the representation as that lamb. So now we don't have to worry about sacrificing animals, but yet the sacrifices were the calves of our lips and our burnt offerings, our prayers to the Almighty, you know, in spirit and truth, and keeping his order and his pattern. So this is where we begin to understand that. So, and the meat offering thereof, shall be 2/10 deals of fine flour mingled with oil, an offering made by fire to the Yahweh for a sweet savour, and drink offering thereof of wine, the fourth of an hin. And you shall eat neither bread nor parched corn nor green ears until the self same day that you have bought an offering to your Elohim. It shall be a statute forever throughout your generations in all your dwellings. And you shall count to you from the morrow after the Shabbat, from the day that you bought the sheaf of the wave offering, 7 Shabbats, 7 Sabbaths shall be complete. Even to the morrow after the 7th Shabbat shall you number 50 days, and you shall offer a new meat offering to the Yahweh. You shall bring out of your habitations 2 wave loaves of 2/10 deals. They shall be of fine flour. They shall be baking with leaven. They are the first fruits to the Yahweh. So here is the feast of the first fruits, right? So here's the feast of the first fruits. And you shall offer with the bread 7 lambs without blemish of the first year, and 1 young bullock and 2 rams, and they shall be for a burnt offering to the Yahweh with the meat offering and their drink offerings, an offering made by fire of sweet savour to the Yahweh. You know, and so when we read in this and we see these offerings made by fire of a sweet savour, we begin to understand the connection with the Ishans, you know, with offering the Ishans, you know, and then also how Jesus Christus says that those who offer of this cup, you know, of the new wine, you know what I mean, those who offer it unworthily is an abomination, you know. So the Ishans is very important in how we offer the Ishans in our prayers, you know, giving thanks to the Almighty, because these things were these were holy convocations where these things were ordered. So if now the animal sacrifices have been done away with and Jesus Christus has sacrificed himself, or has bought himself, you know, as that lamb to be given for our sins, then how much more important is the offering of the Ishans, even, because there's a relationship with this. Then you shall sacrifice 1 kid of the goats for a sin offering, and 2 lambs of the first year for a sacrifice of peace offering. And what we're noticing too when we're reading here in Leviticus 23 is that when it goes through this extent, we were looking at the 7 verses associated, you know, with the Feast of Tabernacles, and this being the first verse was Leviticus 23 and 34. So what happened, what we did was we decided to go and read the actual chapter, you know, and see which each one of those chapters represented. And that's why in the beginning of the vid, we were speaking about what each chapter had represented. going all the way to Zacharias, is that when we come out and we're on the land, though that even though we're here, we have to learn to follow the order or bring the pattern into fruition. You know, we must bring this pattern into fruition in order to come out. Now, those of our people ignoring it, we see the consequences for the ignoring it, or, you know, want to go in their own congregational ways and practice loving the Lord in self-righteousness, or completely ignoring it and going to Egypt. There's something that's said about Egypt too. Egypt in Zechariah 14 must respect the Yahweh. You know, they will respect the Yahweh, and we'll get to that. But let us go through this. Now, first here in Leviticus 23, where we are noticing that it's extensive. It's extensive because we notice that it actually goes through every feast in Leviticus 23. This is where we're noticing the code in we call it the 7 code, you know, in the Feast of Tabernacles, in each place that is mentioned when we're looking in the pure language 7 times. You know, so here in Leviticus 23 is the most extensive of each feast that it tells us that we need to keep in order to be a part of that pattern or come into that order with the Almighty Elohim. So, and the priest, here we go. We're 19. Then you shall sacrifice 1 kid of the goats, okay? A sin offering. I believe we have read that, in 2 lambs of the first year for sacrifice of peace offerings. And the priest shall wave them with the bread of the first fruits, a wave offering before the Yahweh with the 2 lambs. They shall be holy to the Yahweh for the priest. And you shall proclaim on the selfsame day that it may be a holy convocation again. So here, a holy convocation, a mikra. And we might not have called out the feast exactly right by the name. That's why it's good to have the name of each festival in front of us, from the Fasika all the way to the Feast of Tabernacles. Though we are noticing, you know, this is what we're noticing, the order and why Jah has us keep this order, you know, and has us keep this pattern here. So you shall do no servile work, a statute forever in all your dwellings throughout your generations. And when you reap the harvest of your hand, thou shalt not make a clean riddance of the corners of thy field when thou reapest, neither shalt thou gather any gleaning of thy harvest. Thou shalt leave them to the poor. Look at this, to the poor, right? So probably something interesting. Ani, depressed in mind or circumstances. You know, that's interesting, especially looking at the way America treats its poor. You know what I mean? With the wages, they really don't care. And that's why America is falling. That's why America is noticed as Babylon, because the richest country in the world and one of the highest poverty rates. And to the stranger, I am the Yahweh, Yahweh Elohim, when we know that Christ cared very much so for the poor. That's another reason that Sodom and Gomorrah was destroyed. Not only because of their immoral practices, but also because of the way that they treated the poor. You know, a very rich country who abused their poor as well, or allowed companies or whatever it was to abuse the poor. And this is important, very, very important. So, and the Yahweh spake to Moses, saying, speak to the children of Israel, saying, in the 7th month, in the first day of the month, shall you have a Shabbat, a memorial of blowing of the trumpets. Here's the Feast of Trumpets, and holy convocation. So we got here, right? So here we are in the blowing of the trumpets, a holy convocation, a Kodesh Mikra, right? So now verse 25, you shall do no servile work, but you shall offer an offering made by fire to the Yahweh. And the Yahweh spake to Moses, Moshe,